Good morning. I'm Lillian Dupre, your host on Historical Happenings Now, where we interview some of the greatest authors in American history. Today, we're honored to have two of the greatest authors ever, Harriet Beecher Stowe and John Steinbeck, who both did a great job summarizing their time period. To start with, we have Harriet Beecher Stowe, the woman behind Uncle Tom's Cabin, aka the little lady who started the war.
Thanks, Lillian. I'm pleased to be on the show.
We're pleased to have you. So, your book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was published in 1852. What motivated you to write such an audacious novel?
Well, my book was written in order to show the mistreatment of slaves to the overall public. I based my writings off my own personal readings, observations, and accounts. I grew up in Cincinnati, across from the Ohio River to Kentucky, which was a slave state. After I traveled there and saw the horrid ordeals that slaves had to go through every day from the hands of their masters, it drove me on to do something about it to let my fellow Americans know exactly what was going on. Books are read widely by citizens across the nation and generally by the better educated who are able to act out against these problems. But this was hardly my first abolitionist piece. I started as a freelance writer, writing against local and religious protocols to help support my husband and children, so I had experience with writing in the past. However, overall, the initial factor in writing the book was my anchor towards the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. I used the book as a response to that.
Fascinating. Now, how did people react after the publication? I'm sure slaveholders weren't pleased with your book.
No, they weren't. They were not very enthusiastic at all. People of the South criticized it greatly, and many banned the book soon after its publication. Some even wrote letters and full books against Uncle Tom's Cabin. But at the same time, I became a celebrity of all sorts in the eyes of those who did appreciate the book, and I became a spokesperson for those who agreed with my views on slavery.
Ah, I see. Well, we're almost out of time, but could you enlighten us on a brief excerpt from your book?
Oh, certainly. Let's see. The February morning looked gray and drizzly through the windows of Uncle Tom's Cabin. It looked on downcast faces, the images of mournful hearts. The little table stood out before the fire, covered with an ironing cloth. A coarse but clean shirt or two, fresh from the iron, hung on the back of a chair by the fire, and Aunt Chloe had another spread out before her on the table. Carefully, she rubbed and ironed every fold and every hem with the most scrupulous exactness. Every now and then, raising her hand to her face to wipe off the tears that were coursing down her cheeks.
Touching. Well, we're out of time with you, but thank you so much for your time. Up next, we will have John Steinbeck, author of Grapes of Wrath, after this short break. Welcome back to Historical Happenings Now. Here we have John Steinbeck, the author of many famous works, including The Grapes of Wrath, which we will be discussing today. Good morning, John. We're happy to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Lillian.
So, The Grapes of Wrath was first published in 1939, near the end of the Great Depression. What drove you to write such a riveting tale?
I wrote the book to illustrate the poverty among the farmers living in the Dust Bowl. The novel recognizes the abuse and hardships that the farmers, often called Okies, faced in the migration to California during the Great Depression. They were ostracized by the time they arrived in California. They were dirty, broke, often uneducated and emaciated, and many they sought help from refused to do so due to the stereotypes. Part of my hope in writing this was to gain sympathy from the reader, trying to get them to understand all the hardships the Okies had to go through. Some of the chapters also portrayed the dying landscape and the actual condition that the earth was in, which provides the reader with a historical and social background and history.
That's just so sad, those poor farmers. Now, John, did you notice any changes in society after the publication of your novel?
After the book was released, some people were angered over the use of strong language that I used to make the story more realistic and relatable. People were appalled, and the book was banned in multiple locations. Others also argued that certain scenes within the novel were considered unrealistic and disliked the fact that the book did not end happily. Overall, most did not enjoy it first, but over time, the book gained popularity and became a classic novel about the Great Depression.
Would you mind sharing a part of the book with us? We don't have much time, so please make it brief.
Sure, Lillian. This section I'll read is from the very first chapter. When June was half gone, the big clouds moved up out of Texas and the Gulf. High, heavy clouds, rainheads. The men in the field looked up at the clouds and sniffed at them and held wet fingers up to sense the wind. And the horses were nervous while the clouds were up. The rainheads dropped a little spattering and hurried on the same other country. Behind them, the sky was pale again, and the sun flared. In the dusk, there were drop craters where the rain had fallen, and there were clean splashes on the corn, and that was all.
That was beautiful, John. Marvelous. Thank you so much for being on the show. There you have it, folks. Two of the greatest authors in American history. We'll see you next time on Historical Happenings Now. Signing off, this is Lillian.